Today's agenda, I think, will be fairly straightforward, and we'll certainly keep it to the time that we've committed and hopefully give us all a little bit of time at the end to answer some questions. This is effectively a sort of a part two. We had a similar session a month or so ago on the odyssey of coming from an intake request to a contract team through the assembly, the drafting, the internal approval and review, and then ultimately to an external negotiation and a signing process, whether it was a wet or a digital or an electronic signature. And I think that was a very well received view of the trip, of the journey. Today we're going the next step, sort of the second half of a contract's lifespan. Many of us think about getting a contract assembled and authored from content, bringing triggers in from external data sources and metadata to facilitate and enable and automate that part of the process. And we put a lot of work into getting a contract signed. But as I've said to several folks, it's one thing to spend 5 months in getting a contract together, but that contract may run for 5 years. And where do we really leverage the value of the agreement? Of course, it's in that day one, and then ongoing for the next 60 months. So let's sort of work through that today. So our contract's journey may have started with the time that it's requested and passes through some very common following stages. It's requested, you put some information in, these are the parties, this is what I wanted to cover. It's then either drafted by hand, drafted by an artist's view. It is assembled from pieces. It is triggered through your order management platform, your customer relationship management platform, or your sourcing platform. It's then sent in for review and approval based on the clauses used, the changes made, the selections triggered. Is it something that I have to look at from a revenue recognition perspective? Is it something that I got to worry about from an ongoing obligation perspective? And the internal team generally signs off first. It then goes out externally to your customer, to your supplier, to your potential employee, and is then signed off on. We're picking up today after that contract's been signed off, after the ink is dry, after the digital signatures have been exchanged, after it's been loaded back into your common centralized repository, and of course that repository is in the cloud. Obligation management and title management, managing expiry, renewal, ensuring that you're leveraging the contract for what it really is, which is the memorialization of a relationship between two or more parties, and making sure that we live up to those commitments, to those obligations, to those entitlements. And I think for many of us, too, being able to leverage this information, the true sort of system of record or the document of truth, to ensure that everyone is being treated fairly and is driving and deriving the value from the contract. So, without a concrete system of tracking utilization, tracking obligations, expiries, we end up with missed opportunities, revenue leakage, lost cost savings opportunities, non-compliance for regulatory standards, and sort of just bad behavior overall. And really, without a contract repository, without the ability then to also manage against it, we lose the ability to leverage the framework that's in the contract itself. Right? Managing that contract, monitoring the contract performance or the performance of the parties as documented in the contract is an ongoing requirement that is too often ignored. So let's sort of follow a post-sign-off journey, so post-award contract management in our terms, and explore why post-award contract management is critical to the streamlining and optimization of the commercial process. And although we may be starting off in some generalities, we will get down to brass tacks, as they say, and work through some specific examples. So what are some of the core benefits? We've already talked about some of the risks when we don't do it, but what are some of the additional benefits, realized when we do use post-award contract management? Well, first and foremost, we get to identify and correct non-performance. And that can be non-performance by you or non-performance by the other party. So if you're the seller in a relationship and your organization has a commitment to deliver X units or deliver Y kind of service at a certain SLA or service level, it's good to make sure that you deliver your value so that you get paid as you should. Similarly, if you have a vendor and that vendor is part of your extended value chain and they're providing a part that you need to get your products out the door, you want to ensure that they are delivering on time with quality to the right location, and the finance guys want to make sure the payment terms are correct. Managing the contract compliance is key for both those, I'll say, concrete material deliverables, as well as the more ethereal financial or legal or regulatory concerns. Using the data from your existing contracts to build more robust contracts in the future is another added value of post-award compliance. This also sort of lays into the risk monitoring, risk modeling environment, that you want to both monitor your risks and then you want to learn from this and effectively, what's the right term or phrase, I want to ensure that I can now model risk so that in the future I can reduce my non-compliant behavior. This last bullet is an interesting one, and I think for those folks on the call who have revenue responsibility, whether it is supporting your revenue team or if you're part of your normal deal flow, knowing which contracts should be renewed is sort of key. We often think that everyone should be evergreen, but not all customers are equal. Not all vendors are equal. And you want to ensure that you are renewing with the understanding that this is a good deal to take forward. It's also, because of the ability to manage your expiries well in advance, gives you sufficient power, sufficient information to go into a renewal process with eyes wide open and fully armed. The second major area, really of four, for benefits of post-award contract management and post-award contract compliance management is that you have the ability to increase savings and increase your revenue generation. So this is by both enforcing and occasionally avoiding penalties, being able to leverage volume discounts, and this is not just for those folks who are buying, but also think about the value to a sales organization. By tracking compliance to your relationships and understanding whether you've got key customers at a trigger point or a tripping point where a higher discount may be more appropriate, you can increase your customer satisfaction index by extending a discount to an existing customer and ultimately get the increase in overall revenue or sales volume that you were looking for when you struck the contract to begin with. How many times does a customer end up in the 11th month of a year realizing that they've missed a discount that you owe to them and now have a negative perception, right? So this is a great way to stay in front of that. From a supplier perspective, you can identify opportunities to aggregate demand and then consolidate a supply base, yielding a particular savings impact, which is always good for both the CPO and the CFO. And then similarly, being able to track and to be notified when there are opportunities to optimize revenue. Okay, so this is almost acting as a backup to your CRM or to your order management or revenue management systems. It's not often that the legal team can come in and say, I have directly contributed to X amount of revenue, but this is a great chance for those of you who are on the legal team side of our attendee pool today to get out there and brag, to do some chest thumping. The third area is to ensure compliance. All right, so to be able to run through your repository, to be able to identify non-compliant from a regulatory perspective, who has all the appropriate filings in, what auxiliary paperwork and or forms have been submitted, whether this is something like an environmental health and safety statement, whether it is the result of a site audit, but to maintain all of this information in one place to ensure that both your suppliers and occasionally that your customers are within your compliance norms. A side benefit of this, and it's the third bullet on our screen here, is to ensure that some of these supporting documents are valid. It could be something as simple as a certificate of insurance, or it could be an environmental permit or construction permit. Ultimately, we write contracts to minimize risk, to remove uncertainties, right, to document what we expect out of each other. And sometimes it's only by, checking our work later that we can reinforce and reestablish the trust, and that trust is the thing that really mitigates risk. So being able to predict, supplier security risks, quantitatively assess customer and vendor performance, and then leverage this into the risk model that I mentioned earlier to predict future risk and remove uncertainties before they can occur. These are all part of the main 4 core tenets of the benefits of post-award contract management. Now, before we jump into the poll, I will remind folks, because we've had about a 50% jump in attendance in the last 10 minutes, that we will have time at the end for questions. Please do send your questions in through the Q&A tab in your WebEx viewer. If you are having any challenges with the presentation, please do reach out to Ultria Marketing. They are our hosts. They will answer your questions. And again, this is Arthur Raguette with Ultria, and I thank everyone for attending so far. Today's first poll question, and there will be several. What is the main problem that you face during the second half of a contract's life cycle? Again, this is after the contract's been signed. 1, or A, difficulty in searching and providing appropriate access control to your contracts. B, regulatory compliance management. C, tracking obligations and milestones, and I'll include in that maybe entitlements. D, managing your contract expiration and your renewals. Or E, all of the above. And the poll will stay open for a few minutes. So again, A, difficulty in searching / access control of your legacy historical contracts. B, managing regulatory compliance. C, tracking entitlements, obligations, and milestones. D, managing expiry or expiring contracts, as well as renewals. And this is true of whether they are evergreen or not evergreen. And E, all of the above. Now, it looks like we've opened our poll for a very long time. I'm going to ask our fine hosts to go ahead and close the poll in another 15 seconds. A, difficulty in searching. B, regulatory compliance. C, obligation, milestone tracking. D, renewal and expiry management. E, all of the above. And I'll ask our host to push these out. Very good. And I think our next graph we'll make sure is in full percentages. It seems like there's a lot of density to E, all of the above. Great. Thanks very much. Can we clear the screen? And we'll move forward. So post-award compliance management as an enabler. CLM technology enables efficient post-award contract management, resulting in significant improvements of commercial performance. I mean, if we look at what areas specifically we would see a jump in, heightened visibility throughout the process, active measurement of contractual obligations, tracking key performance indicators, and providing visibility into regulatory compliance. The centralized repository is absolutely key to this process. Now, the centralized repository, of course, is cloud-based and maintains all of your contracts and all of your supporting documents with secure, controlled access. And the access control is absolutely key here because you only need to have the shareholders and the stakeholders involved in that particular piece of contractual relationship involved when it comes to reviewing the clauses or any kind of sort of evidentiary deep dive. But what you do want to provide to your commercial, to your business users, oftentimes is access to contract performance. And it's by having selective access to the repository and the data within the repository that that is enabled. You know, as an example, perhaps you want to take contracts written for customers in New England and share those with the performance against those contracts with the regional sales manager and finance manager for just that territory. There's no reason to show the guys in sunny California what the performance is for the folks up in Boston. Right. Another value of that centralized repository as it pertains to post-award is the configuration of contract metadata, alerts, and reminders. It's the core of alerts and reminders that let us track and get informed about milestones being met, obligations being met, and also bringing in that additional operational data to compare your goals of the contract terms with the actual performances measured by your ERP or by your operating platforms. Once the contract's been signed and you've got your milestones and obligations in place and you're starting to track them, about 3 months into the contract lifecycle, someone is going to ask you to start tracking some additional data. And that is where the ability to add metadata to the contract header, not the signed contract, we can't modify that, of course, but additional information that can be attached or associated with that contract so that you can manage its performance more closely or more accurately or with a slightly different dimension. This certainly adds value to the contract repository itself, as you could only imagine. So here are some rudimentary or some screenshots of our calendaring of the alert platform. And once you've got this sort of alerting, reminding platform in place, you're also looking to search and find, and many of you mentioned that being able to access your contracts and find them was a germane or key problem. So the Ultria CLM provides, as part of its common repository, the ability to run free text search and to run more structured metadata-based search. So any content within an agreement, within its exhibits, its schedules, its addendums, its additional componentry can be searched each and every single word. Everything is OCR'd, that is converted to searchable text, plus all of the metadata about that contract. Who are the parties, what were the products, what were the services, what were the terms, and that's true of whether it's a sell-side contract, buy-side contract, intellectual property, employment agreement, intercompany letter memorandums of understanding, etc. Now, managing actual performance against these contracts is a matter of tracking utilization, ensuring that contract value generation and risk mitigation is covered by quantitative as well as qualitative measures of the contract party performance. This is accomplished through integrating external systems such as your CRM or your ERP or other operational reporting tools through either a loose or a tight integration. We have some customers who simply enter performance data by hand others who load up Excel files or database file exports from their SAP or Oracle or JD Edwards or Infor environments, etc. Now, obligation management is an extension of this, which is typically associated with things like financial obligations and entitlements, and this gives you the ability to track and enforce penalty clauses. And within the post-award platform, to be able to model even the most complex entitlement or obligation models and to trigger, based on performance or non-performance, output report and alert notification to the other stakeholders involved, i.e. sales management or finance or purchasing, that an action needs to be taken and the details on that particular action. Right? This could be the funding of a market development fund, a retailer-style rebate, or a discount on future purchase. Now, there's a lot of information here, and of course, we all know that if you have a long-running contract, maybe it's a base initial term of 5 years, and then an additional, 5 one-year renewals, that your project team, your customer team, your account team, your supplier teams change. So being able to have a central control and then delegate out actions for review or actions for modification, update, outreach to the accounts, etc., is part and parcel of what's required. Now, certainly you may have systems in-house that do some of this, but being able to tie the contract to it is absolutely key. And as part of our integration framework, we simply connect to those feeding systems, let's say your CRM or your SRM platforms. Here's an example of visual representation of compliance data and the ability to now sort of change your view for long-term contracts and provide this kind of information directly to your trusted external parties. You may have a distributor or a licensee in a particular region. You want them to see the obligations to the customers, want to see the entitlements from a marketing fund perspective. Or you may have a supplier and you want them to see their performance, almost like a supplier scorecard, so they can improve their performance and fix things before the penalty clauses start to get invoked. All right, so depending on the relationship, this can be a very open and transparent environment, or it can be selectively opaque. Providing instant access, and notice that this is a different branded environment, different look and feel. You would do this for each of your external parties. This gives them instant access to contract detail, contract summary, and they're able to view all of their particular obligations across the multiple components of a relatively complex, let's say, structured environment of a master agreement, multiple service agreements, multiple schedules, multiple addenda. Let's take a sort of a straightforward use case. And let's say this use case is an e-commerce company. Pick your favorite online shopping site and their logistics partner, right? The folks who are responsible to get that delivery to you, whether it is wholesale distribution or whether it's last mile. They've got a long-term running contract between the two. There's an SLA, service level agreement, from the shipping logistics company that says we will get 95% of all your deliveries to your customer within 2 days of receipt of the shipping request, right? So this is a company that is doing fulfillment and then putting on a truck, getting it from the truck to somebody's front door. There's a penalty clause that basically says if we do not meet the 95% SLA, there's a 10% against those charges, rebate due from the shipper back to the e-commerce vendor. So effectively, when you order something, a record is created in the CRM or order management platform of the e-commerce company. Right, on the close of that order, right, that order is sent to the fulfillment company. When that fulfillment company, and this is stage 6, ships, there's a record created in their warehouse management platform or their ERP. On delivery, a confirmation of the delivery is sent back to the e-commerce company, received in their CRM. The data is simply aggregated on a monthly basis, measured against the SLA of 95%, and then the penalty clause is enforced. very straightforward notification. I use this example or show this example simply because many of the folks we talk to feel that doing this post-award compliance is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to involve multiple teams. Well, yes, there are going to be multiple teams involved. There'll be a touch base with IT, touch base with security. But this data can be moved automatically, heavily integrated, or it can simply be moved through emails and messages. So the choice to integrate is yours. The way you integrate is yours. But the value received can be quite high. Our second poll question: how advanced is your current post-award contract management process? And again, this time we'll ask the poll to show it in percentage only. A, no process. B, and I hope a lot of you are not at that stage, by the way. So A, no process currently. B, contracts are stored and shared on a common database or a SharePoint mount. C, central repository with search. Or D, full analytics for obligation, compliance, and risk management. And we'll leave this open for about a minute. We're about halfway through. A, no process. B, contracts stored centrally. C, a central repository with search. So this is the ability to go in and pull information out of your contracts. Or D, full analytics for obligation, compliance, and risk management. We're open for about another 10 seconds. And let's see what our results are. Wow. Okay, so we're all looking at the bar graph. 1 in 8, so to speak, are running with full analytics for obligation, compliance, and risk management, which is absolutely stellar. I'm hoping that as we go through our session today, that this may give you some additional analytic methods, or maybe you're looking for alternatives. A bulk of you, 7 in 8, contract stored on a central drive. So this is non-searchable, got to look them up, open them up. Perfect. I thank everyone for their participation, and this will help us as we move through. So compliance management, regulatory compliance management, clause level tracking, being able to identify and track contracts at the clause level. Why is this important? I may have EHS, I may have SOC, I may have financial regulatory filings. Being able to do clause level tracking lets you know which contracts are in compliance down to the clause level. More importantly, as laws change, regulations change, you have the ability to go in and pull just those contracts that need to be refreshed or updated or amended. This allows you to stay in compliance cleanly. If you were to do that against a file-based repository or shared drive, I think that's an awful lot of work. Likewise, the ability to store and search down to the clause and even the phrase level. Not just your contracts or your agreements, but also the supporting documents, exhibits, schedules, Excel sheets, etc. And then audit trail, right? Not only do you have all of the audit capability for how the contract got where it is, but if you are looking at an amendment process or a cloning process, to be able to know who did it, why they did it, and what they did. And ultimately, of course, to ensure that all supporting documents are organized, they're in one place, and you have a relationship all matching back to that hierarchy of contract docs. Yeah, so here's just, again, one of our screenshots that shows a non-compliant document. So I may have multiple documents associated that perhaps, in this case, environmental and insurance certificate, maybe the W-9 form for a new supplier or a new customer, in this case, a new supplier, and to show which of these are current and which of these are not. You can simply then click into that link, open up the non-current or the expired document, generate an email to the stakeholder to say, hey, your insurance certificate has expired. Just to go down another simple use case, Let's consider, again, two folks, maybe an electronics manufacturer, marketer in Europe, and a fabrication shop, let's say, in China. Fabrication shop manufactures electronics for this EU-based company, which are then sold across the globe. In order for these goods to be sold within the EU, the manufacturer needs to ensure environmental compliance by the offshore fabrication shop. And the offshore shop may not have the same rules, regs, or environmental laws, as you might guess, just going from country to country. In order to ensure this, the CLM will track the contract, any required regulatory compliance filings as per the contract, the criteria to measure compliance, right? In this case, periodic environmental audit results. So the company in China is required to have a third party that's agreed to between the two come in, do a site audit, and upload by the 15th day following the end of a quarter, whatever the case may be, to make sure that those environmental audits are happening and that they are passing. If the supplemental data is not arriving in time, generates a penalty clause or a non-compliance event, the CLM's comparison is fairly straightforward and preserves the full audit trail to support regulatory reporting of the manufacturer in Europe to its regulatory agencies. We've talked a little bit about the value of the central repository, core performance management, measuring, compliance management, and now let's look forward, which is predictive risk management. Predictive risk is an interesting challenge. There are many different inputs to a risk model. You can leverage the performance of old contracts and common performance criteria across them, perhaps across a similar goods or services basket by a particular provider. You can create performance analysis based on old contracts tracking external party performance over time. You can predict risks based on clauses used. Did I use the clause that we prefer? Did I use alternate 1, alternate 2? Did I drop to my fallback? Leverage past performance of similar contracts and historic data of the contracting party. I can also integrate with the FMS, or financial management information systems, to further improve decision-making, perhaps based on late pay. Is this a customer that is paying on time? Maybe I want to check my trouble ticket system. Are they coming directly to us even though we have a two-tier support model? All the things that indicate positive or negative behavior. So if I look at a combined risk profiling dashboard, we've got multiple elements that can be inserted into the frame. Variation of contract risk scores over time. What my obligation risks look like in terms of compliant, non-compliant obligation performance. Overall contract party risk. This could be based on past performance, based on category performance overall, or based on an external fee, let's say from a credit bureau. I could also look at the contract text risk. How many clauses were used that were preferred? How many clauses were of a higher risk? How many were modified? And all of this rolls up into a common risk rating. Now, every customer, every client, right, is going to have a different way that they want to weight each of these risk inputs. So from an Ultria perspective, our job is to ensure that we've got that comparison point against your baseline contracts, and for each of these risk methods to present and provide for you, and then work with you and your trusted partners to ensure that your risk modeling meets your business criteria. So a simple risk model. Let's take another manufacturing company. And perhaps they are purchasing engineered components, or engineered bolts in this case, from two different suppliers. The contract may allow for a variation in supply because they're buying something in bulk. plus minus 5% on a monthly basis. The production schedule, of course, for this primary company is based on and is directly tied to the success of these suppliers in delivering their product to the factory. For the CLM to take account of predictive risk modeling, it will use clauses that were used for the contracts themselves, past performance of the contracting party based on their performance numbers. Did they hit them plus or minus 5%? Were they on time? And they can also optionally look at overall performance across all contracts for, let's say, these categories to have a derived average weighted value, see whether these particular suppliers are a little off or a lot off. This trend information gives you enough warning so that you can jump in front of a non-performance event, because as much as a penalty clause is useful and as much as the penalty amount may be valuable, we put penalty clauses in place, we put obligations in place to maintain our businesses. By leveraging the artificial intelligence of the CLM risk modeler, you now have that slight edge to prevent non-compliance events from occurring in the first place. So expiring and renewal management is something that everyone should be on top of. And I say that with such arrogance, and I don't mean to. It's something that is fairly straightforward, but if we don't track our contracts and we don't remember where they are, if we don't tag them or capture data about renewal dates, renewal process, or expiry dates, someone is going to be surprised. And I think, for everyone on today's call, we want the other party to be surprised, not ourselves. So having alerts set for when a contract is going to expire, having the right people notified of that expiry well in advance so that you have a chance to take a look at your options, whether to go to an optional renewal, whether to find an alternate supply, or to let your boss know that this customer that's been responsible for 13% of your revenue is going to go away in 3 months or 5 months rather than later this month, right? So getting in front of those kinds of things can make or break someone's day. Having that kind of robust reporting, the flexible notifications, and having stakeholder-specific dashboards so that you can track a watch list of contracts that are due for automatic renewal. Just as we worry about when things expire, there's also potential downside to renewing a contract that is not good for you. So, the best laid plans of mice and men when the contract was written, in its third year, perhaps we need to renegotiate some terms. And it's good to be in front of that as you can. Additionally, those authorized users, because contracts are long-running, yes, it took 5 months to write it, but I've got 5 years to execute against it, we want to be able to delegate based on the results of these triggers, of these alerts, of these reminders. Teams change, we want to make sure that we stay on top of it, have the software track that, and notify everyone accordingly. Here's an example of our dashboards, and our dashboards are highly configurable. Each user, as a matter of fact, can research, and sort of resettle for any of these particular objects, as well as create new objects on the fly. But the basics of what's expiring, what's going to renew automatically, what compliance, and then underneath, these are specific agreements or contracts that I want to keep an eye on. And I can manage based on their utilization, based on when they're going to expire, and I can add alerts at any time. And those alerts can come to me by email, by notification in the system, even via SMS. So the ability to check supporting documents as part of your expiry, of your renewal. Think about it. Renewing a contract is straightforward. Renewing your site survey or your environmental permit or your certificate of insurance is something that is often overlooked. Might as well capture it now and then notify the external party directly by the CLM. And that's part of what that external party portal provides, is extending the value of the contract platform to your external users, to those trusted parties that are part of your extended value chain on both the sell side as well as the buy side. So the third poll question, and this is our final poll question for the day, I promise. Contract management automation, where is your organization today? A, determining whether CLM would be beneficial for you. B, actively evaluating CLM solutions. Or C, already working with a CLM solution. So we'll give you a minute or so. We've got another 45 seconds on the clock. A, determining whether CLM would be beneficial. And by the way, we do have an ROI example that if time provides, I'll talk to a little bit. Otherwise, do reach out, and we have a ROI calculator. B, actively evaluating CLM solutions. I certainly invite anyone on this call to reach out in case you'd like to run a sample agreement or two through our process. We have everything is confidential. We're on secure servers, but sometimes things will make more sense with your data. Or C, already working with a CLM solution, and perhaps you're just looking for alternatives, or you've got a great solution to date for getting contracts signed, but once they're signed, you're sort of stuck. So with that, we've ended our poll. Let's take a look at what our results are. This is absolutely phenomenal. So everyone on the call already understands that a CLM can be valuable. Slightly less than half of you have a CLM solution in place, and almost 2/3 of you are actively looking, which is great. I hope it's been an educational or informative or at least entertaining session today. So I think we'll go through a very fast track then on determining whether the CLM will be beneficial, and then we'll be able to jump into we'll have time for some questions. We can share this offline as well. I'll step through it very quickly because I think based on the poll results, we've got some folks who are actively evaluating a CLM. This may also help you activate the appropriate budget, which is part of the evaluation process. So oftentimes we think about contract management as a way to improve our process, improve efficiencies, do more with the same amount of people, all very good things. But sometimes it's also beneficial to say, what is the top line benefit? How can a contract lifecycle solution and how can post-award contract management impact top line, i.e. revenue numbers? So, let's take an organization that's focused on we'll start on the sales side here. The annual revenue of $1 billion, right? So somebody in the Fortune 650 range. Number of legal professionals working on contracts, 9 people on the legal team, counsel or paralegal. Number of salespeople, 20 folks. Number of active contracts, this are our contracts that are currently being fulfilled, 4,000 contracts. Average value of the contract today, $300,000. We'll start with that as our current sort of as-is statement. Now, if we're looking at the ability to take this baseline information and demonstrate to your controller for your legal team, maybe it's your finance analyst for the sales team or the revenue team, or maybe it's your CFO. What are some ways that we can, in very quantifiable terms, get them to see some additional top side or top line revenue add? One, and this is a number from IACCM, revenue loss for organizations that don't use a contract lifecycle solution, according to IACCM, is 9.2%. Now, to me, that's a very, very big number. So let's cut that in half and say 50% of 9.2% on a $1 billion revenue company is $46 million. That is a very big number. But maybe we can set that aside. And we can add them up later if we're looking for a good business case. But just think, 46 million, million here, million there, pretty soon we're talking real money. Let's take that third line, revenue increase on renewable contracts. On average, if you have 30 days notice before a contract renews, and I believe this was based on either Accenture's or Goldman Sachs' research, and I can get you the specifics, there's a 5% gain or net revenue increase on renewable contracts when you have sufficient knowledge. So if I look at effectively 30%, and again, that's conservative. So let's say I got 4,000 active contracts. Let's say 1/3 approximately are renewable. That's 1,200 contracts with an average value of $300,000. And that's $360 million. And a 5% gain across that is $18 million net new dollars that you would not have had otherwise. So if the $18 million doesn't do it, we can add the 46 and end up with $64 million in net new revenue through the application of a contract compliance platform that helps you automate the tracking of your renewals and therefore also the management of your expiration. If we were to take a small jump towards the bottom line, in other words, cost reduction, or finding alternative channel for the assets that you currently have. And by the way, some folks will tell you that, for every dollar you save, it's the same as 10% revenue when I'm looking at your P&L, which probably is not a bad estimate. Let's take a somewhat larger company. In this case, let's take an oil and gas firm. If I'm looking at $4 billion in turnover, so maybe this is oil and gas services, right? Someone who's in oil field service, pop a hole kind of work. I may have 15 folks in legal who are focused on contracts. By the way, I probably have another 15 that are focused on rights management or something else, but let's just say 15 on contracts. And I've got a 60 salesperson organization with 6,000 active contracts and an addressable procurement spend of about $1.2 billion, which is not a bad ratio for a $4 billion sales organization. Let's see where we can maybe save some costs. Aberdeen Research, I think, had pegged that with a contract lifecycle solution, you can reduce the amount of time that it takes to get a sales agreement out the door by 20%. Now, I'm not a big fan of saying, oh, you can reduce staff, because no one likes to let people go. But you can, however, move more deals through the same pipe, or perhaps there are some people who can be redeployed to higher value or alternate value tasking. But effectively, this probably represents conservatively $1 million or $900,000 in cost allocation or cost reallocation for the legal team. From a sales perspective, I'm looking at a 24% reduction in deal turn, right? It also increases your day sales outstanding, which is the top line function. But on the bottom line side, I'm looking at being able to reduce my cost of sale relative to my salespeople by about 20%. On the pure procurement side, and this is something that gets the CPO, Chief Procurement Officer, right, or your CFO incredibly excited because you can measure this same product year on year, right, same acquired goods or services. It is not uncommon to look at a reduction through consolidation of suppliers or demand aggregation of 10%, and 5% of that as direct cost savings. So if I'm looking at a $1.2 billion addressable procurement spend, I'm looking at a 10% reduction in volume. It's $120 million through consolidation. 5% of that $120 million sort of category equals $6 million in hard dollar year-over-year savings. So both of these help define what a quantifiable value may be. Please do feel free after this to view and download, actually, our ROI calculator. It's available right off of our website, Ultria.com, or you can email us at info@ultria.com, and we'll get that out to you. So we've got just a few minutes. I'll skip through the relatively brief advertisement, so to speak. Today we focused on the post-award compliance management. It's that orange or gold color universe on the right-hand side of your screen. But Ultria, as a full lifecycle CLM, offers everything from automated drafting, document generation, Word plug-in environment to keep people in the tools that they are used to. Full clause library, playbook support, template library, multilingual, by the way, with a workflow and approval process from the initial request intake through the authoring, internal approval, and reviews. Cloud-based, secure, robust, internationally available repository that supports wizard-driven request portals, whether you're coming in from Salesforce, coming in from even Dynamics, and from your CRM on the sell side, coming in through your supplier relationship or e-procurement or purchasing systems, or also just coming in from an intranet request portal to be able to do low-touch or zero-touch document generation for things like NDAs, standard terms and agreements, employment contracts, and the like. Highly flexible reporting, very dynamic searching, very high performant. And then the parts that we talked about today, post-award compliance management, leveraging the power of the repository, integrating with your operational platforms to drive threshold and trigger-based alerts and awareness of obligations, entitlements, and compliance, as well as non-compliance behavior. Last but not least, as part of this is the risk profile, risk model, risk dashboard, and be able to extend both the risk modeling across a category, across a supplier base, across a customer base, or just across a particular product line, and being able to share this information with your trusted third parties, your trading partners, whether they be on the sell side or the buy side value chain. With that, I know we started a few minutes late. We are at the top of the hour. I think I'll, if it's okay with everyone, we'll send out answers to the questions that come up. Let me just see if I've got anything that I can answer quickly. I guess for those folks who came in late, a question that went to our marketing team is, will we be able to provide a replay for the very beginning of this? This entire session will be available as a downloadable, and the team will certainly reach out. I did have one question, maybe two, that I'll answer right now. One question was, is the post-award compliance a separately purchasable module? So this must have come from someone who has an existing CLM. We will try to reach out. Please follow up. We can talk about how we can take our post-award components and bridge them in. Depends on whether or not you have a separate authoring environment. Another more direct question was tied to the integration with operational systems. Just trying to paraphrase this, given the minute or two left that we have. This person has a operational system for order booking from Oracle, and they have their deliverable and e-catalog shared through SAP. From a compliance perspective, we will be able to combine and help validate the order from Oracle and the deliverables from SAP to the channel in a compliant or performant way. Maybe I should reword that. Yes, Ultria post-award compliance management can take multiple feeds. In this case, we'll take your order feed from your Oracle environment. We'll take your deliverable feed from SAP. We'll use the contract record ID from both, and we'll map the line items so that you could have a unified single place where all stakeholders can validate and view your own compliance and meeting the obligations of your customer despite having two different source systems. With that, again, this is Arthur Raguette with Ultria. I'd like to thank everyone for your time and attention today. Again, minor apology for the change in the dial-in phone bridge. I'm glad that worked out for everyone, and we will make sure that we send out a replay as soon as we can. Have a great afternoon, a great morning, or a great evening ahead, as the case may be, and thank you again for participating.